Hey guys. Hey, I wanted to start out by asking you a question today. So, have you guys ever found yourself begging for someone not to leave? Maybe you beg them to give you another chance. Maybe you beg them to stay with you. Maybe you found yourself explaining over and over again why you're worth loving, why you're worth choosing, and why this relationship is worth saving. And somewhere in all of that begging, you forgot something very important. You were never supposed to have to convince someone of your value. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. This is Becoming Her Again, and I am Renee Marie. This is where we talk about life and self-worth and healing and finding our way back to ourselves. So today I want to talk about this subject of begging someone to stay. And I think so many of us have experienced at some point in our lives this situation where we have begged someone to stay in our lives. And so I just kind of want to talk to you about this. This was something on my heart today, and I want to challenge that today, so because so many times when we beg someone to stay, we're not just asking them to remain in our life, right? So many times without even realizing it, we are actually handing the authority over to them to decide how valuable we are. And you know what? They don't deserve that kind of power. So, we should never have to beg someone to be chosen. So let's think about what begging actually says, right? I mean, begging says, please don't leave me. I promise I'll do better. I will make you happier. I will try harder. What can I do to make you stay? Please change your mind because I love you. Whatever you need me to be, I'll become it. And sometimes we say these things because, we're terrified of losing this person in our life. And we might be scared to be alone. We might be scared to start over. We might not know how to start over. We're afraid. What if this person walks away and somehow our life isn't okay anymore? But here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Why are you fighting so hard to keep someone who's not fighting just as hard as you are to keep you? Why are you standing at the door trying to convince this person to stay when they're running out the door? And, they're the ones that's decided to walk away and to walk out. And at some point, we have to stop chasing the person who is walking away and turn around and ask ourselves, why am I chasing someone who doesn't want to stay? So this is a topic, that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to be the first to admit that I've done this multiple times throughout my life. I begged people to stay. And there was a reason, that I chose a different path at the end. And so my story is here to, help guide you guys along your journey. And I hope that I'm able to bring some of that insight to you. But, so many times, we don't see value in ourselves. So we are begging this other person to stay in our life when we don't really need them to stay, right? Your value does not change, though, because someone else sees it or doesn't see it. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if they see it or they don't see it. It really doesn't. Although in the moment of this, and when you're in the heat of it, that's how you feel. You feel like it does matter. It does matter. But here's something that we need to understand, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. Someone's inability to recognize your value does not decrease your value. You know what I mean? It just doesn't. So I'm going to say that again, because I think if you're anything like me, it's hard to get it in our heads. But someone's inability to recognize your value does not decrease your value. If somebody doesn't appreciate you, that doesn't mean that you're not worth being appreciated, right? If someone doesn't choose you, that doesn't mean that you're not worth being chosen. If someone doesn't love you the way that you deserve to be loved, it doesn't mean that you're unlovable. It means they are not the person who's able or willing to give you what you need. And it's so painful, and I understand that, and I feel that so much. I feel that. It's so painful. So I'm not going to pretend like that's not painful, because that is painful. And it doesn't matter what I say, that doesn't lessen the pain of that. Because the problem is, when we're rejected, rejection hurts, right? And when we love somebody, that hurts when they don't love us back the same way. And when we feel that they are abandoning us, we feel very hurt and sad about that. We don't want to be abandoned, right? But pain doesn't mean that we should surrender our own dignity. And so, so many times I think that we think that it's a choice, right? Like, oh my goodness, well, if I just do all of these things, this person will stay and I'll be so happy. But the problem is, we're abandoning our own selves by doing that. And that's so hard, and it is so painful. And the thing is, we can't convince somebody to love us or stay with us just because we're begging them to do so. And they might stay, right? Maybe they'll stay out of guilt. But, how does that look for you? And really, how does that look even for them, if you look back at this after maybe being gone for so long from a situation and you think, man, I really begged this person to stay so many times. I really gave up on myself, It's terrible. So I think that what we need to say to ourselves is we need to stop proving to other people our worth to them, right? Think about how exhausting that is, that we are continuously trying to prove who we are to this person. You're constantly trying to make sure you look good enough for them. You're trying to be a little bit smarter. You're trying to hold down the perfect job and make sure you're making enough money, to bring into the relationship. Maybe you'll be a little less emotional. Maybe you'll, be a little bit more accommodating to their needs. Maybe you'll make sure you pick up all the items at the grocery store that they want. Maybe you'll learn to be a little bit more patient. And you just keep thinking, if I can just be enough for them, then they'll finally appreciate me and value me. But unfortunately, what happens if the goalpost keeps moving? You're doing all of these things, but it seems like, you can never get to where they want you to be. You're just quite not good enough, And so, when things go south in the relationship, they hit the road, right? They hit the road, and then they create this constant problem of you begging or chasing after them. And, because the goalpost keeps moving, you just keep becoming more and more and more to try and make yourself so good that they stay and that they love you and that they don't want to leave. And the problem is they're still not satisfied so many times. And now what does that look like for you as a person? Now you've just abandoned your own self. You don't even know who you are anymore. You have lost total sight of who you are because all you see is them. So all you're doing is just moving toward them in the way that you think, because we don't even really know if we're going in the right direction, but you think maybe you're going the right direction. You think maybe this is what will keep them there, but what if it doesn't? So eventually, you don't even recognize who you are anymore. You've spent so much time worrying about them that you forgot who you are. And quite honestly, that's just too expensive. That person's too expensive for you because you have given too much of yourself to be in this relationship. And quite honestly, some people just cost us too much to keep them around in our life, And we have to ask ourselves those questions, are they costing us too much? I mean, think about that. And if this was just like a person you worked with at your job, maybe it's not a big deal. But maybe if this is a relationship and you're in this, situation, in this relationship, maybe you have kids with them, whatever that is, and you're just trying and trying and trying. But at some point or another, we have to ask ourselves, is this person worth what I'm giving up? Is this person worth that? And not to say that they're bad people or anything like that, or that you can't stand them or anything like that. It's just what it comes down to is now you're maintaining this presence, that you're constantly sacrificing your own peace and your own identity and self-respect to keep them in your life. And, unfortunately, there comes a time and a point really where you need to ask yourself, and say to yourself, I really need to evaluate this. I may love this person, but I'm not willing to lose myself to keep this person. So, I think that we shouldn't give the power so easily over to someone else. They shouldn't be able to decide our future. And I know it's hard. Like I said, we're in a relationship and it seems like, we're in it. We set our vows, right? We're in this for life. We're in this till eternity. But if there is too much on the line, then, we really have to evaluate that so we make sure that we also stay a whole person. And, we can't hand our power over to someone. We can, but in doing so, unfortunately, it breaks us to the point where we are shattered. So in doing so, and I don't ever want to see any of you guys do this. This is exactly why I have this channel. This is one of my biggest reasons. Things I have gone through, I don't ever want somebody else to go through that. So, I didn't realize that I had been handing my power over to another person. But in all reality, that is exactly what I was doing. And so I don't want to see you go through that feeling, because once you're shattered, you have to put yourself back together, and then you're in such a vulnerable state, and you have to do all of this work on your own, and you really don't even know who you are, and so you don't know where to even begin. And so I don't want to see that for any of you out there. But this is a part I really want you to think about. Ask yourself, why do we want to allow another person to decide what they're going to do with my life, right? When they leave and then they come back and then they leave and then they come back, and then you're standing there like, well, I'm really glad that you came back here where, you should be, right? And you keep doing that, and you keep doing that, and you keep doing that, and allowing that to happen. here's what happens to you as a person. You start to break down into this small version of yourself, this version of yourself that you can't even recognize anymore. And what has happened, and you don't even realize it's happening, but you have given them the power to make their decision, okay? So you've allowed them to say, here you go. Go ahead and make your decision, and I'll go ahead and stand here and wait for you to decide what your decision is. And then I'll decide how I'm going to move forward. What? Think about that. Think about that. Why on this earth would we do that? Why would we do that and give that to somebody else? Why are we allowing them to make the decision about our own life? Seriously, our own life. We've allowed them to make that decision. And you know what? That is too much of a cost for you, for me, for any of us out there. Too much of a cost. You know, that's not okay. We have a choice on what we're going to do with our life. You know, if they leave, our dreams don't leave with them, right? If they leave and stop loving us, that doesn't mean that we stopped loving ourselves. It might mean we need to figure out how to love ourselves again for the first time in a lot of years. But it doesn't mean that we stopped loving ourselves. If they don't see a future with us, that doesn't mean that we no longer have a future. I mean, we still have a future. You know? It's how we look at it. So it doesn't mean that. Somebody can leave our life and they didn't take our life with them. You know, they don't have that. They don't have that opportunity to take our life with them. They can walk away but they don't take our purpose with them. They can reject our relationship, the one that we built together, you know, whatever this is, whoever this is. And it doesn't reject our entire existence, right? We're still here. Your life is still on this earth, and your dreams are still here right in front of you. And your future is still waiting for you. So I want you to think about this. Don't hand the steering wheel over of your life and put it into somebody else's hands while you're just in the passenger seat. No, we got it wrong. So sometimes, you know, the most powerful thing we can say to another person is, okay, just okay. That's all you have to say. So, you know, I really thought about this because, you know, all of this, like I said, you know, goes along with many times in my own life where I did this exact thing. And, you know, it was so many times where I wished that I could go back and change and just say, okay, just okay. That's it. So, you know, so I think that if you're finding yourself in a situation like this, I want you to really think this through because maybe this will help you. You know, I think so many times we think strength is, you know, fighting for this relationship or fighting for, you know, our place within, you know, this whole situation, whatever this situation is. We have to fight for the relationship. We have to fight for their attention. You know, we have to fight to make them understand. We have to fight to make them stay. Or, you know, we have to fight to make them come back home. But sometimes, you know, strength is maybe just standing there while somebody walks away and saying, okay. You know, they have a choice too, right? But so do we. We have a choice. We have a choice. And by saying okay, I want you to know, because this isn't a place that we want to be bitter. You know, we're not creating that space here. This is a space of healing, right? So there's not a space here for bitterness or anger or any of that. But saying okay doesn't mean that you're angry or bitter. It's not because you don't care. It's not because you don't love them. It's not because you don't want them to be by your side, right? But it's just finally understanding that you can't control this person, and you can't force somebody to stay in a relationship with you and love you that way. You cannot make someone choose you. You cannot make somebody appreciate you, and you can't force them to love you correctly or a certain way. And you shouldn't have to, but you certainly should not have to beg someone to stay. And if they want to be there, they'll be there. And if they don't, honestly, there's the door. And you can say that with lovingness. It does, again, you don't have to be bitter about the situation. But there's the door really just means you are going to be okay as a human. You're going to be okay as a person. You accept that they don't want to be with you anymore. And you just say, there's the door, go. You have that right. You have the choice. You have your own opportunity. You can make your own decision, and you can go walk through that door. I'm not going to chase you. I'm not going to convince you. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to beg you to stay. But I'm not going to destroy myself trying to prove that I'm worth staying for. You're free to leave. You're free to leave. I love that line. And and I love this line just as much because you're free to leave, but then you say, and I'm free to continue living. I mean, how wonderful is that? You still get to live just because that's their decision. But the right person in our life, they're not going to make us try to, show up and audition for a part, we shouldn't have to feel all of these ways about showing up and being, if we can't even be ourselves around them, to the point where we're not understanding what they even want us to do. Or constantly making us wonder, are you enough for this person? How are you going to change anymore? You've already changed all of these things about yourself and it's still not working. What am I going to do to make this person happy? When are they going to leave me the next time? If they've already left once or twice, I promise they'll continue on doing that. So a healthy relationship, first of all, a healthy relationship, yes, there's going to be disagreements and misunderstandings and arguments along the way. And I'm certainly not saying that those things are never going to happen because you have a healthy relationship. But by all means, you should not have to wake up every day or every other day wondering, is this person going to leave me again when things go badly and they're not feeling whatever they're feeling or not feeling, when they just up and leave, that can't continue to happen because it's putting all of this weight on your shoulders as a person. You shouldn't have to wake up and wonder, are they going to love me the right way today? Or, or when am I going to be standing there and they're going to pull the rug out from under me and hit the road again, And you shouldn't have to shrink yourself to make sure that, you're doing everything the perfect way. If they want to be in your life, they're going to be in your life, whether you're saying the perfect thing or you're not. A relationship's, certainly will have problems, yes, but people are going to disagree, and there will be difficult seasons along the way. But there's a difference between working through problems together and then begging someone to come home and be with you, maybe you and your family, maybe you and your kids, maybe you and your pets, whatever that is. You should not have to beg somebody to stay in your life. You should not. And in doing so, you will lose yourself. So don't confuse the two about working through problems compared to begging someone to be there, to stay in your life. Those are two very, very different things. And, by letting them go, it doesn't define who you are as a person. I understand the difficulty of this. Again, I've been through it. I've dealt with it myself. So I understand it very fully to the fullest extent. Do I get it? But, if someone decides that they want to be in your life, or if someone decides that they don't want to be in your life and you're looking at, they don't want to be here, then let them go and mourn the loss of them. Cry when you need to, grieve when you need to, rest when you need to, be mad when you want to be disappointed, be upset, be hurt. Feel all the feels, right? But don't let their decision become your identity. Don't turn "they didn't choose me" into "I'm not worth being chosen," because that's not true. They might not have chosen you, but that's okay. And maybe, really just maybe, this time with that person was supposed to end. And I think so many times, we forget about that. Just because the door opens and somebody's brought into your life, maybe God, brought this person into your life, right, for a season. That doesn't mean that they're always going to be there, or that they're always supposed to be there until the end of your life. I think that many times we confuse that. We think that, the door opened, they came into our life, or we feel that God brought them into our life. But maybe it was only for a season and not forever, So don't confuse, this, and don't create more devastation for yourself, where you're not able to, make sure that you feel good about who you are as a person. It's upsetting that somebody maybe doesn't want to be in your life. It is upsetting. We don't want that, right? But that should not define us. And they shouldn't get to be able to continue to define us when they're not in our life anymore. So let that person go, let them go, grieve them and move on, but don't let this become your identity, because you are still worth choosing. You are, and the right person is going to choose you. Your worth belongs to you, and nobody gets to take that with them when they leave, and nobody can take that away from you. And I want to remind you of this. So, the door works both ways. So when you say there's the door, and again, just out of kindness, and we're not saying that out of bitterness, but the door works both ways. And I think so many times, we confuse who's going to walk in and out of our door, and we think that it's only our door, that people are coming in and out of, right? And we forget that, we can also close the door as well, and we have a right to do so. And we can decide who's going to walk through our door. And I think a lot of times we really need to think about that, especially when we've gone through these difficult situations and when we're in a very difficult situation and season of our life with a person, and a person that, generally speaking, is probably a relationship, and you're having a very hard time with this. But when do we get to decide? When do we get to decide? And you know what the answer is? We get to decide right now. We can decide who's going to walk through our door again. And quite honestly, this is a bit of an example of my own situation. And this is where I got to the place in my life where I was like, I also can make a decision here. I don't have to sit around waiting for another person to make their decision, to, make their decision based on their decision on what I am going to do with the rest of my life. I also have the right to decide who's going to come through my door again and show up for me the right way, right? So, you don't have to stay in a relationship or in a place where you're constantly being made to feel like you're unworthy or you're unlovable, and you don't have to remain in a relationship where you feel like you're begging for basic consideration. If somebody wants to be in your life, right, they're not going to just up and vanish and leave from your life and then come back and tell you, well, I mean, I think that this is where, I should be, after much consideration. If you had to figure it out, then we have problems, So, I mean, that's a lack of consideration on so many levels. And that's just basic consideration. You don't just up and leave somebody's life. And if somebody is doing that to you, then it is time that we start inwardly looking at what we need to do to protect ourselves. And again, who can walk through our door? We don't have to wait for somebody else to give us permission to move forward with our life. We can choose ourselves. We can love ourselves enough to say, you know what, I love you enough that I'm going to choose myself and protect my peace and my dignity. And, I will choose my future. I'll decide my own future. I don't need somebody else to make that decision for me. And sometimes choosing yourself simply just means saying, I wanted you to stay. I wanted you to be in my life. I love you. I care for you. But I'm not going to beg you to stay. And that's just such a different kind of strength, It really is. Because now we've chosen ourselves. And they don't get to decide. They don't have that right to decide that for your life. This is your life. That's their life too. And by all means, if that's their decision, then that's their decision. But at some point or another, we have to have enough self-respect that we say what we choose. And we say, you know what, this is my door, and I'll allow the right person to walk through my door if I choose them to be in my life. So, today I really just want you to remember this. I want you to remember that you do not have to beg someone to stay. Don't beg someone to see your worth and to see your value. Don't beg someone to love you. Don't beg someone to choose you. Don't beg someone to come back home to you. If they wanted to be there, they would have never left to begin with. Just don't beg them. Don't hand another person the authority to determine how valuable you are. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Your value existed well before they entered your life. And even, no matter how many years they were in your life, your value still existed before they entered your life. And your value is still going to exist when they leave, or when you choose to not let them through your door anymore. You're not less of a person because they chose another path. You're not. And you're not broken because someone didn't choose to stay with you. And you are not finished because someone walked away. Your life is still yours. So let people make their own decisions. If they want to stay, let them stay because they chose you freely. But if they want to leave, let them go. And then, turn around, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and just keep moving forward. I mean, the goal isn't to convince everybody to stay in our lives. The goal is to build a life, that you don't have to abandon yourself for. Just to let somebody else in, you shouldn't have to abandon who you are as a person. And, I really think that that's like the biggest lesson to this is that, the goal is to build a life that you don't have to abandon yourself for, just to keep someone else in it. So, so I just really want to leave you with this. Don't beg them to stay. And instead, I want you to choose yourself because you're so valuable. You're so worth it. You're so worth it. I want you to give yourself a lot of grace. You're making so much progress. And I just want you to keep healing. Just keep pushing forward. You're doing an amazing job. Give yourself lots of love. And I appreciate you being here today. Thank you for coming. And I'll see you in the next episode, friends. Take care.